From the moment I was old enough to understand the difference between hope and reality, my Aunt Penelope stood as the embodiment of both. Elegant, wealthy, and endlessly eccentric, she lived in a grand Victorian estate in Surrey with Persian rugs, silver tea sets, and walls lined with oil paintings of our ancestors, and eventually, her beloved Pomeranian, Lord Marmalade. As a child, I would visit her sprawling home during holidays. My parents were modest folk in Croydon, barely making ends meet. Aunt Penelope, however, would swoop in like a royal savior, plucking me from my ordinary life and immersing me in hers. She'd cradle my face in her gloved hands, her perfume sweet and heady. "My darling Eloise," she would whisper, "one day all of this will be yours." I believed her. Every time she made that promise, my heart would race. She bought me books on classical literature, enrolled me in ballet lessons, and insisted I learn to appreciate fine art. While my parents couldn't afford piano lessons, Penelope had a Steinway in her parlor and hired a private tutor just for me. I wasn't just her niece. I was her legacy. She never had children of her own, claiming that society was too dreadful a place to inflict more of herself upon it. But she often said I was different. "You're the only one in this family who understands refinement," she'd declare, sipping Earl Grey with her pinky raised, Lord Marmalade curled in her lap. As I grew older, the promise of inheritance wasn't just implied, it was stated in front of others. At family gatherings, she would say it loud enough for everyone to hear. "When I'm gone, Eloise will continue my legacy. She'll know what to do with it all." Naturally, this sparked envy. My cousins would glare, my mother would blush with pride, and I, naive, hopeful me, would beam, thinking I was chosen. I worked hard to be worthy of her words. I studied literature at King's College London, published short essays, even interned at a heritage conservation trust, all while she funded my tuition and gave me monthly stipends. Then came the day everything shifted. Aunt Penelope called me to her estate, saying she had an announcement. I remember arriving in a rush, dressed neatly, heart racing with excitement. Perhaps she was finalizing the will. Perhaps she wanted to discuss the finer details of her estate. I had no idea. Instead, I found her in the drawing room, holding Lord Marmalade like a newborn, a wide smile on her face. "I've made the most wonderful decision," she said. I sat on the edge of my seat, waiting. My palms were sweating. Her eyes twinkled as she said, "I've updated the will. Lord Marmalade is now the primary heir." My breath caught. I thought it was a joke. But then I saw the solicitor behind her, holding a folder stamped with legal seals. "Of course," she said cheerfully, "you'll still get something. A modest stipend to keep you comfortable." Comfortable? I had dedicated my life to becoming her heir, to embodying the culture, elegance, and refinement she prized. And now, she was giving it all, to her dog. My mouth was dry. My voice barely emerged. "But you promised." She waved a hand airily. "Oh, darling, promises are like perfume, meant to linger, not to last." And just like that, the life I'd been groomed for evaporated into thin air. But what neither she nor Lord Marmalade knew was that I wasn't about to accept this betrayal quietly. The next few days were a blur of confusion and quiet fury. I couldn't bring myself to confront her directly. Her decision had shaken me to my core, and yet, I knew something had to be done. After all, this was not just about money or property. It was about everything she had promised me, everything she had led me to believe. It was about the shattered trust that hung between us like a fragile thread, ready to snap. I spent the following morning wandering the gardens of her estate, aimlessly pacing the cobbled paths. The grand fountains, the rose gardens in full bloom, everything looked like it had been taken straight from the pages of a fairy tale. But beneath the beauty, there was a growing darkness, a sense of betrayal I could no longer ignore. Lord Marmalade had always been her favorite, but I had never imagined he would be placed above me. I couldn't help but wonder, had she always seen me as an afterthought? A token of her generosity rather than her true legacy? That evening, as the soft light of dusk settled over the estate, I decided to confront her. There could be no more silence, no more pretending. I had to make her see the truth. The drawing room was as grand as ever. The thick velvet curtains were drawn, casting a shadow across the room, and the fire crackled softly in the hearth. But even with all the luxury surrounding us, I felt small. She was sitting by the fire, sipping a glass of sherry, with Lord Marmalade nestled on her lap as usual. Her eyes glinted with a strange satisfaction, as if she had already won. I stood at the doorway for a moment, gathering my thoughts. Then, with a deep breath, I entered. "Penelope," I said, my voice steady despite the fury building inside me. "We need to talk." She looked up at me, her smile never wavering. "Of course, darling. What's on your mind?" I could feel my heart racing as I took a step closer. "I want you to explain to me why you gave everything to that dog. You promised me, Penelope. You told me all of this would be mine. But now, I'm left with nothing. Nothing but a pittance." Her gaze remained calm, as though she had anticipated my words. She placed her glass on the table and petted Lord Marmalade's head affectionately. "Darling Eloise, you have always been so dramatic. But you know as well as I do that a legacy isn't just about wealth and property. It's about loyalty, love, and understanding." She paused, her eyes narrowing. "And Lord Marmalade is the only one who truly understands me. He is more devoted to me than anyone else ever has been, including you." I felt my chest tighten. How could she say that? After everything, after all I had done for her, this was the reward? I tried to steady my breath. "You've been grooming me for this my entire life," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "And now, you're telling me that everything I worked for means nothing?" She stood up slowly, her heels clicking against the marble floor, and came toward me with a pitying smile. "You've always been so eager, Eloise. So desperate to prove yourself worthy. But you see, my dear, sometimes people don't need to be worthy to inherit greatness. Sometimes, they just need to know how to take care of it." I stared at her, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "And Lord Marmalade is the one who will take care of it." Penelope's smile deepened, but there was a sharpness in her eyes now. "He will. And perhaps one day you'll understand why." With that, she turned her back on me and walked back to her chair, her attention fully back on her dog. The conversation was over. The air felt heavy with unspoken truths, and I was left standing there, hollow and broken. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let this stand. She had underestimated me, and now, I would show her that I was more than just a helpless niece. I had my own plan. The following days were filled with a quiet sense of determination. I couldn't stand still, couldn't simply accept Penelope's betrayal. But I knew better than to act rashly. This was a matter of strategy, not emotion. If I was going to take back what was rightfully mine, I had to be patient and clever. I spent hours each day going through her old letters, looking for any sign, any mention of a possible loophole. I wasn't a lawyer, but I had learned enough over the years to know that people sometimes overlook small details in their haste to secure their assets. Penelope might have thought she had covered all her bases, but I wasn't so sure. One afternoon, as I was perusing a stack of documents in the library, I stumbled across something unexpected. A letter addressed to Penelope from a solicitor, dated just a few months ago. The letter contained details about her will, specifically about the distribution of her estate. My heart skipped a beat as I read the final paragraph, which stated that the will was subject to review every 10 years. This meant that, while Lord Marmalade was the current beneficiary, that could change. This was it. The crack in her fortress. The possibility that I could still reclaim what was mine. But how would I go about it? Penelope was smart. She wouldn't leave anything to chance. I had to think of a way to outsmart her, a way to make her believe she was in control while I carefully took back what I had lost. The next step was clear. I would need to bring in someone from the outside, someone who could help me navigate the legal intricacies of her will without arousing suspicion. But I had to be careful. If Penelope found out, everything would be ruined. As I sat in the drawing room later that evening, contemplating my next move, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I quickly stood up to answer it. To my surprise, it was Rachel, an old friend from university who had become a solicitor herself. She looked different, more confident, perhaps a little more serious, but she was still the same Rachel I had known back then. "Good evening, Eloise," she said with a smile. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." I was stunned, but I quickly recovered. "Rachel, what a surprise." "No, you're not interrupting anything. What brings you here?" Rachel stepped inside, her eyes scanning the grand hallway before resting on me. "I heard about your aunt," she said softly. "I know this must be hard for you. I led her into the drawing room, where we sat down. It's a lot to process, Rachel. I thought I understood Penelope, but now everything feels so different. I don't know who she is anymore. Rachel gave me a sympathetic look. I know how much you mean to her. It must be difficult, especially with the way she's been treating you recently. I nodded, my heart aching. It's not just about the treatment, though. It's about the legacy. Everything she promised me, everything I thought was mine. It's been given away. And I need to do something about it. But I don't know where to start. Rachel was quiet for a moment, her brow furrowed in thought. What if I told you that I might be able to help? That I could look into her will and see if there's any way to challenge it? I froze. Could she really help me? Could she be the key to everything I needed? You'd do that? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Rachel smiled again, but there was a steely resolve in her eyes now. Of course. I've worked with wills and estates for years, Eloise. If there's a way to challenge her decision, I'll find it. But we need to be careful. This can't get out. I nodded, feeling a wave of hope wash over me. For the first time in days, I felt like I wasn't alone in this. With Rachel's help, perhaps there was a way forward. But I also knew that Penelope would never let this go easily. The battle was just beginning. The days following Rachel's arrival were filled with a new sense of purpose. Now that I had a lawyer on my side, I wasn't just biding my time anymore. I was making moves, quietly, carefully, but with growing confidence. Rachel was the key, and I couldn't afford to waste any time. We started by reviewing Penelope's will in detail. It was a lengthy document, filled with technical jargon that seemed designed to confuse anyone not familiar with legal matters. But Rachel, with her sharp mind and expertise, made sense of it quickly. She pointed out the most crucial part, the clause about the will's review every 10 years. If the will has been reviewed recently, Rachel explained, then Penelope's estate could still be in a state of flux. But, if not, it could be vulnerable to a legal challenge. We need to find out when the last review took place. If we can prove it was outdated, we could have grounds to contest it. It was a start, but there was still so much work to be done. Rachel suggested that I quietly gather more information about Penelope's finances and any recent changes in her lifestyle. This would give us a clearer picture of whether she had been making decisions that could affect her estate. It was crucial to find any discrepancies, anything that didn't line up with what the will said. Over the next few days, I slipped in and out of Penelope's house under the guise of visiting her. I had to be careful, of course. Penelope was sharp, and if she suspected anything, all of this would come crashing down. I wasn't there to confront her yet, just to gather information. I took note of the way she lived, the people she was spending time with, and any signs that her financial situation had changed. It wasn't long before I noticed something strange. Penelope had recently made a significant purchase. A luxury car. It wasn't the kind of thing she usually splurged on. I made a mental note to bring it up with Rachel. It could be an important clue. By the end of the week, Rachel and I had enough information to take the next step. We needed to get access to Penelope's solicitor, someone who could confirm the details of the will review and any potential changes that had been made in the past year. If we could get that information, it would give us a solid foundation to move forward. But there was a problem. Penelope's solicitor was notoriously difficult to reach. He didn't take calls easily, and he didn't share details without a good reason. Rachel was confident she could handle it, but I could see the hesitation in her eyes. She knew this was a dangerous game. We set up a meeting with him for the following week. It was our best chance, but it also felt like a risk. If we pushed too hard, Penelope might find out. And once she did, everything would change. As the meeting drew closer, the tension between Rachel and me grew. We had talked about the plan endlessly, rehearsed every possible scenario, but there was still a lingering doubt in my mind. Would this work? Would we be able to outsmart Penelope? The night before the meeting, I sat in the drawing room, my mind racing. The house was silent, the only sound the occasional creak of the floorboards as I walked. I kept picturing Penelope's smug face, the way she'd looked at me when I first tried to confront her. I had to remind myself that I was doing this for a reason. To reclaim my future, to take back what was mine. But deep down, I knew there was more at stake than just money or inheritance. This was about power, control, and the years of manipulation I had endured. I wasn't just fighting for a piece of land or a house. I was fighting for my dignity. The day of the meeting with Penelope's solicitor arrived, and the weight of it hung heavily on my shoulders. Rachel and I had rehearsed everything. What to say, what not to say, how to stay calm, and how to read between the lines. But despite all our preparations, I could feel the pressure mounting. This was the turning point. If we played our cards right, we could uncover something that would shift the balance in my favor. If not, everything would crumble. We arrived at the solicitor's office just before noon. The building was old, its stone facade weathered with age, giving it an imposing and cold feel. The inside was no different. Dark wood paneling, thick carpets, and a faint smell of paper and dust. It felt like a place where secrets were kept. The solicitor, a man named Mr. Howard, was waiting for us. He had an air of detachment, as though he'd seen it all before. His sharp eyes briefly scanned us both before he motioned for us to sit. He wasn't one for pleasantries, and neither were we. "I understand you have some questions regarding Miss Penelope's estate," Mr. Howard said in a clipped tone. "I'm afraid I'm not at liberty to disclose certain details without her express consent." Rachel spoke first, her voice calm but firm. "We're aware of the limitations, Mr. Howard. We're not asking for everything. Just some clarity on a few points. Specifically, we're concerned about the recent changes to Miss Penelope's financial situation. We have reason to believe that there may have been some discrepancies in her recent decisions. The purchase of a luxury car, for instance." Mr. Howard's eyes flickered for just a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. "I'm afraid I don't see how that's relevant," he said, but his tone had softened slightly. "We're not here to make accusations," Rachel continued. "We're simply trying to understand if there have been any updates to her estate planning, any changes that weren't reflected in the will we have on file." There was a long pause as Mr. Howard studied us, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk. I could see he was weighing his options, deciding how much to reveal. Finally he spoke. "Miss Penelope did, in fact, update her will just over a year ago. However, that update was minimal. It didn't reflect any significant changes in her financial status. As for the car, I'm sure Miss Penelope simply decided it was time for a new vehicle. It's hardly unusual for someone in her position." Rachel's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't press further. "Could we have a copy of the most recent will?" she asked. Mr. Howard's gaze hardened. "That's not possible at this time. I can't provide you with a copy without Miss Penelope's direct permission. I'm sure you understand." The conversation was starting to feel like a dead end. We had learned some useful information, but not enough. The details about the will update were vague, and the solicitor had closed the door on any further access to the document. We couldn't afford to give up, but I could feel the frustration bubbling inside me. "Is there any way we could schedule a meeting with Miss Penelope herself?" I asked, my voice more forceful than I intended. "I think we need to speak directly with her about this." Mr. Howard gave a tight smile. "I'll let Miss Penelope know that you're interested in speaking with her. But I must warn you, she's not a woman who's easily persuaded." I stood up, feeling the weight of the moment settle around me. We hadn't gotten everything we needed, but we had a sliver of hope. Penelope would be the final piece of the puzzle. If we could get her to talk, we might finally uncover the truth. The days passed in a blur of restless waiting. Rachel and I spent hours strategizing, trying to figure out the best way to approach Penelope. We knew she was not someone who would give up answers easily, but we also understood that the truth was lurking somewhere beneath her cold exterior. Our task now was to find the key that would unlock her defenses. After several more phone calls with Mr. Howard, Penelope finally agreed to meet with us. The date was set, 2 days from now, in the same cold, imposing solicitor's office. I could feel the tension building as the moment approached. This was it. The pivotal moment in our journey to uncover the truth. On the day of the meeting, I could hardly concentrate. My mind raced with 1,000 possibilities. What if Penelope refused to tell us anything? What if the meeting only led to more confusion? I had to stay focused. I had to remember why I was doing this. For the truth. For justice. For everything I had lost. Rachel and I arrived early, both of us dressed in dark, professional attire. We took our seats in the waiting area, but it felt like the walls were closing in on us. The silence was thick, almost suffocating. The only sound was the ticking of a clock on the wall. Finally, the door to the solicitor's office opened, and there she was, Penelope. She stood tall, wearing an air of superiority that only she could carry. Her eyes were cold, unfeeling, and as she stepped inside, she gave us a curt nod. "I assume you both have questions," she said, her voice calm but firm. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I had to stay composed. I had to get her to open up. "We do," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Penelope, we need you to explain why you made the decisions you did. The will, the money, everything. It doesn't make sense." Penelope's lips twitched slightly, but she said nothing. She simply walked to the chair opposite us and sat down, crossing her legs. She looked at us with that same cold, calculating gaze. It was clear she was enjoying this. "You think you can just come in here and demand answers?" she asked, her voice laced with amusement. "Do you really think I owe you any explanations?" Rachel didn't flinch. "We're not here to demand anything, Penelope. We're here to understand. To get the truth. You owe us that much." Penelope leaned forward slightly, her gaze never wavering. "You want the truth? The truth is, I don't owe you anything. Not now, not ever." Her words hit me like a slap. I wasn't sure if it was her arrogance or the sheer cruelty of her tone, but I felt a surge of anger rising within me. I had to keep my emotions in check. This was a battle of wits, not of rage. But then, she said something that stopped me in my tracks. "There's one thing you should know," she said, her voice lowering. "What's in the will doesn't matter. What matters is what I've done since then." I froze. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Penelope's eyes gleamed with something almost like satisfaction. "You're not the only one who's been making plans," she said, a smirk playing at the corners of her lips. "I've made sure my assets are protected. What you think is yours, well, let's just say it's not going to be so easy to take." Rachel and I exchanged a look, both of us feeling the gravity of her words. What did she mean by that? What had she done? Before I could ask any more questions, Penelope stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "I'll leave you to think about what I've said," she said, her tone final. "But don't expect any more answers from me. The game is over." She turned on her heel and left the room, leaving us in stunned silence. The door closed behind her with a soft thud, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. We were too stunned to react. But then, Rachel broke the silence. "She's hiding something. She knows more than she's letting on." I nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. Penelope wasn't just playing a game. She was in control. She had something up her sleeve, and we had to figure out what it was before it was too late. It had been a week since the meeting with Penelope, and I still couldn't shake the feeling of unease. What exactly was she hiding? What had she done to ensure her assets were protected? We had been left with more questions than answers, and the clock was ticking. I knew that whatever Penelope was planning, we had to stay one step ahead. Rachel and I decided to meet with Mr. Howard again. If anyone could help us understand what Penelope was up to, it was him. We made our way to his office, which was located on the outskirts of London. The building was old, with tall windows and stone walls that seemed to carry the weight of history. Inside, the atmosphere was formal, almost intimidating. Mr. Howard's office was no different. Shelves filled with legal books, a large mahogany desk, and a chair in the corner where I often sat during our previous meetings. As soon as we sat down, Mr. Howard got straight to the point. "I've had a look at Penelope's financial records," he said, his voice low and serious. "There's something unusual about them." I leaned forward, my heart racing. "What do you mean? What's unusual?" Mr. Howard sighed and opened a folder on his desk, revealing a set of documents. "Penelope has been making significant transfers of funds to an offshore account. It's not just one transfer, it's a series of them, all made in the last few months." Rachel's face hardened. "Offshore accounts? Why would she do that?" "I don't know yet," Mr. Howard replied, "but I can tell you this much. Those transfers are designed to make it difficult for anyone to trace where the money went. It's almost as if she's trying to hide something." I felt a chill run down my spine. This was bigger than I had imagined. Penelope wasn't just protecting her assets. She was covering her tracks. But why? We need to find out where that money went, I said, trying to stay calm. There has to be a way to trace it. Mr. Howard nodded. I'll do my best. But it's going to take time. These accounts are well hidden, and the connections are complicated. Time. We didn't have much of it. I had to keep reminding myself to stay patient, but every day felt like a lifetime. I couldn't let Penelope get away with whatever she was planning. The stakes were too high. As we left Mr. Howard's office, Rachel and I exchanged a look. We knew this was just the beginning. Penelope had made her move, and now it was our turn. The next few days were a blur. We spent hours researching offshore accounts, meeting with financial experts, and tracking down leads. Every time we thought we were getting closer to the truth, we hit another dead end. Penelope had covered her tracks well, and the more we uncovered, the more questions arose. Then, just when I thought we were running out of time, we received a tip from an anonymous source. Someone had seen Penelope meet with a man who was connected to a powerful criminal syndicate. The source couldn't provide much more information, but the implications were clear. Penelope wasn't just playing dirty. She was involved in something far darker than I had imagined. Rachel and I met that night, our minds racing with the possibilities. What if she's been using the money for something illegal? Rachel asked, her voice filled with concern. I don't know, I replied. But we have to find out. This is bigger than us now. The next day, we set out to track down the man who had been seen with Penelope. If we could find him, we might finally get the answers we had been searching for. We had no idea what we were walking into, but we couldn't turn back now. Penelope's game was far more dangerous than we had ever imagined, and we were in it deep. Every decision, every step, could lead us closer to the truth, or to a point of no return. The chase had led us here, to a secluded warehouse on the outskirts of London, where the air was thick with tension. We had tracked down the man seen with Penelope, an associate of a notorious criminal group that had ties to international money laundering. The walls of the warehouse were cold and unwelcoming, and the only sounds were the distant hum of traffic and our own quickened breaths. Rachel and I had spent the last few days preparing for this moment, gathering what little intel we had on the man. He was known for being ruthless, a shadow figure whose name had never appeared in the headlines, but whose actions left a trail of destruction behind him. We couldn't afford to fail now. Whatever Penelope had gotten herself involved in, it was about to come to light, and we were determined to be the ones to expose it. As we approached the entrance of the warehouse, my heart pounded in my chest. It wasn't just about Penelope anymore. It was about something much bigger, something that could shake the foundations of the very world we lived in. The door creaked open with an eerie sound, and we stepped inside. The dim light from the ceiling barely illuminated the space, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. I glanced around, trying to make out any movement, any sign of the man we were looking for. But the warehouse seemed deserted, silent, save for the sound of our footsteps. And then, a voice broke the silence. Well, well, it said low and gravelly. Did you really think you could find me so easily? I spun around, my eyes scanning the darkened corners of the warehouse. There, emerging from the shadows, was the man we had been hunting for. His face was cold, unreadable, his eyes sharp like a predator's. He stepped forward slowly, his presence as menacing as the reputation that preceded him. You must be the ones who've been poking around, he said, his lips curling into a smirk. You've been following the wrong trail, love. Penelope's not the one you should be after. Rachel took a step closer, her voice steady despite the danger. What do you mean? What is she involved in? The man's expression darkened. You have no idea what you're walking into. Penelope may have thought she could play both sides, but she's in way over her head now. The money you've been tracing, it's not just hers. It's part of something much larger, something that could ruin more than just her. My pulse quickened. What are you saying? What's this all about? The man chuckled, but there was no humor in his voice. It's about power, control. Penelope was just a pawn in a much bigger game. She thought she could protect herself, hide her assets, but now she's caught up in a web she can't escape from. And you're just caught in the middle. I felt a chill spread through me. The stakes had just been raised, and everything we thought we knew was suddenly in question. Penelope had been hiding more than just money. She had been playing a dangerous game, and now it seemed like we were caught in her web, too. The man stepped closer, his eyes never leaving us. If you're smart, you'll walk away now. Let it go. Otherwise, you'll regret it. Rachel's voice was firm. We're not walking away. We need answers, and we're going to get them. He smirked again, his hand resting casually on the waistband of his trousers. You think you can take on people like me? People who have nothing to lose. The tension in the air was palpable, and I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. There was no turning back now. We had come too far, and the truth was just within reach. The man's eyes flicked to the door behind us, and for a split second, I saw something shift in his gaze, a hint of something darker. But before I could react, he turned on his heel and began walking away. Don't follow me, he called over his shoulder. The next step is yours to take. We stood frozen for a moment, processing what we had just heard. Penelope had been caught in something far more dangerous than we had imagined. And if we didn't act quickly, we might lose her, and ourselves, forever. With no other choice, we turned and followed him, stepping deeper into the darkness that awaited us. The darkness of the warehouse seemed to close in on us, making every step feel like an eternity. We had followed him into the depths of this criminal world, and now there was no turning back. I could hear the faint sound of footsteps ahead, slow, deliberate, as he led us deeper into the heart of the operation. The urgency was palpable. Every moment felt like it was pushing us closer to something irreversible. Rachel's hand rested on the gun at her side, her gaze never leaving the man leading us. I could feel her readiness, the same sharp focus that I had learned to rely on. It was now or never. If we didn't get answers, we might not leave this place alive. Finally, we arrived at a door, reinforced with steel, standing at the far end of the warehouse. The man stopped and turned to face us, a cold smile playing at the corners of his lips. This is where it ends, he said. You want the truth, don't you? Well, it's here, all of it. But once you know, you can never unknow it. Rachel stepped forward, her voice steady but her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. Open it. We're ready. The man reached for the door, his fingers brushing over the cold handle before he turned it slowly. The door creaked open, revealing a small room beyond, filled with old filing cabinets, boxes stacked high with documents, and a desk that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. In the center of the room, though, was something else. An old battered laptop sitting on a table, its screen flickering faintly. He walked over to the table and gestured for us to follow. Everything you need is on there. Penelope's connections, the money trails, the players behind all of this. It's all in that laptop. I stepped forward, my heart pounding in my chest as I took a seat at the table, my hands hovering over the keys. The man leaned against the wall, watching us closely. You'll want to brace yourselves, he warned. What you're about to see. It's bigger than you think. This isn't just about money or power. It's about lives destroyed, families torn apart, and an empire built on lies. I hesitated for a moment, taking in the weight of his words, before pressing a key to wake up the laptop. The screen flickered, and then the documents began to appear. Bank statements, encrypted emails, messages that tied Penelope to powerful figures, criminals, and politicians across the globe. The web was vast, the connections endless. It was like watching the fabric of society unravel in front of me. Rachel stood beside me, her face pale as she scanned the documents. This is insane. Penelope was a part of all of this? She was working with them? The man's eyes darkened. She wasn't just working with them. She was orchestrating some of it. But not out of choice. No, she was a pawn in a much larger game. They used her, and when she started to dig too deep, they set her up. Now, she's on the run. And if you think you can save her, think again. I looked at the man, disbelief clouding my thoughts. So, this was all just a trap? She was just caught in the middle? The man nodded grimly. It's always been about control. Penelope thought she could play them, but she never understood the rules of the game. Now you're in it too. If you want out, you'll have to make a choice. A chill ran down my spine. What choice? There was no turning back now. I had seen the truth. Penelope's role in this was far darker than I had imagined, and there was no way to undo the damage that had been done. But there was one thing I was certain of. We had to finish what we started. I turned to Rachel, her eyes locked on me. Without a word, We knew what we had to do. We couldn't let this go. We couldn't let Penelope's involvement be swept under the rug. She had to face the consequences, just as everyone else involved in this had to. Let's finish this, I said, my voice steady despite the weight of everything we had learned. We stood together, ready to face whatever came next. But as I turned back to the laptop, a new notification appeared on the screen. An incoming call. My heart skipped a beat. It was Penelope.